investigation into Downing Street parties following the statement from the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police?
Michael Ellis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, as the House will be aware, earlier today the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police confirmed that the Metropolitan Police Service will be investigating alleged breaches of COVID-19 regulations within government. This is a matter for the police, and the House will understand that I'm not in a position to comment on the nature or content of the police investigation. Mr. Speaker, I have previously made clear from this dispatch box that the government recognises, and I recognise, the public anxiety and that it appears as though the people who have been setting the rules may not have been following the rules. And I would like to repeat that sentiment today. And this is why the Prime Minister asked for a Cabinet Office investigation to take place. The terms of reference for that investigation, led by the Second Permanent Secretary at the Cabinet Office and the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, Sue Gray, have been published and laid in the library of this House. Those terms made clear that, as with all internal investigations, Mr. Speaker, if during the course of the work any evidence emerges of behaviour that is potentially a criminal offence, the matter will be referred to the police and the Cabinet Office's work may be paused. Mr. Speaker, as the House would expect, there is ongoing contact between the Cabinet Office investigation and the Metropolitan Police Service. However, the Cabinet Office investigation will continue its work. I would urge the House to wait for the findings of that investigation and for the police to conclude their work. That is important to allow the work to take place unimpeded and to protect the rights of all involved. Mr. Speaker, I must emphasise that matters relating to adherence of the law are properly a matter for the police to investigate, and the Cabinet Office will liaise with them as appropriate. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that the findings of the investigation will be provided to this Honourable House and made public. Mr. Speaker, the House will understand that there is a limit to what I can say, given this is an ongoing investigation. I also cannot comment on what is now an ongoing police investigation, and therefore I ask that members of the House let the investigation run its course and do not preempt its conclusions.
Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for this urgent question. And well, all too soon, the Minister and I find ourselves here once again, rather than dealing with the cost of living crisis impacting on families, we're talking about scandals in Downing Street again. And the members opposite can chunter from their positions, but they're allowing this to happen, Mr. Speaker. 2 months now, Cabinet Ministers have been working hard to make Sue Gray the most famous woman in Britain. In response to every question asked about the poor conduct, bad behaviour and rule-breaking culture that this government has overseen, the ministers have repeatedly told us Sue Gray is the answer. Now there's a police investigation, and the terms of reference for Sue Gray set by the Prime Minister are clear. If any evidence emerges of behaviour that is potentially a criminal offence, the matter will be referred to the police. So it seems, Mr. Speaker, potential criminality has been found in Downing Street. What a truly damning reflection on our nation's very highest office. So I ask the Minister, given this morning's announcement, when will the Sue Gray report finally be published? Can he assure the House that the Sue Gray report will be published in full, not just the summary, and will the accompanying evidence be provided? And can he clarify for the House what Sue Gray and her team will be doing whilst the police conduct their investigation? Can the Minister confirm whether the decision to delay the publication of the Sue Gray report was made by the Metropolitan Police or the government? Given this government's record, Mr Speaker, on lost phones, missing messages and minutes, can he assure the House that all evidence from the Great Inquiry will be properly held by the Cabinet Office? Can he clarify if the Chancellor, as a resident of Downing Street, is cooperating fully with the Grey Inquiry and if the police investigation, and has he been interviewed? Just weeks ago, Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister told this House there was no party. How does the Paymaster General explain that? I know across the country people know enough. They have made up their minds about the Prime Minister, so when will his party catch up?
Well, Mr Speaker, I will agree with her first point. Her first point was, why aren't we talking about cost of living? Well, the Prime Minister right now is working on cost of living. He's working on Russia, Ukraine. He is doing those jobs, and the Prime Minister is focused on those areas. Mr Speaker, I think she also, in her second point, forgets that the word potentially was used. The reality of the matter is that the fact that the police are investigating the matter does not draw any conclusions. If she looks at the statement issued by the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Cressida Dick, she has said that, stressed the fact that the method is investigating does not mean that it will necessarily result in fixed penalty notices in every instance and to every person involved. So potentially is a key and operative word, and she wants to jump to conclusions, but she asks about the details of the investigation. Those are, of course, matters for the Cabinet Office and matters for the police. They're not details of which I would be informed. I wouldn't expect to be informed because the police have independent operational assessment of matters that are before them, and they will conduct the matter as they see fit.
Sir Edward Lee, when Europe stands on the brink of war and there is a cost of living crisis, can we please have a sense of proportion over the Prime Minister being given a piece of cake in his own office by his own staff?
I completely agree.
Mr Speaker, and on Burns Day, it's probably appropriate if you'd start with the line, "The best laid plans o' mice and men gang after gley." Or perhaps a line from the other great Scottish writer, Sir Walter Scott, "Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive." I do wonder, Mr Speaker, now that the police are finally involved, how much more personal humiliation and indignity will the Prime Minister be prepared to endure? But perhaps more importantly, how much more of this embarrassing circus are his colleagues prepared to tolerate before they act to remove this man from office? Because this isn't going to go away. This wound is not going to heal miraculously by itself. And I'm sure we all know there's an awful lot more still to come out. So can I ask the Minister, at any time, has anyone from the Sue Gray inquiry contacted the Metropolitan Police? When did the Cabinet Office first learn of this police investigation? When does he now expect the Sue Gray report to be delivered? And finally, can he assure this House that when it is delivered, that it will be delivered in full, will be open and will be completely transparent for every member of this House to access?
Well, he asks me questions about the police investigation, and I have no knowledge about that, and nor would I expect or should I have knowledge about it. And he asks about the publication, and I have already indicated that the findings of the investigation will be published.
Carper.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I ask the Paymaster General, I accept he may not be able to answer this question now, but can he assure the House that he will keep, either he or other ministers will keep the House posted about whether the Prime Minister is going to be interviewed by the Metropolitan Police, either as a witness or as a potential suspect in this criminal investigation?
Well, I thank him for his question, but of course the police will conduct the investigation, as they do in any case, entirely at their own discretion. and I would not expect to be informed about that, nor would the House expect me to be.
Riedel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There have been newspaper reports of Downing Street staff being told to delete evidence of parties from their phones, and staff fearing to give evidence to the Sue Gray inquiry for fear that the PM will see it and there'll later be recriminations. So now that there's a police investigation, will the Paymaster General make it clear throughout Whitehall that all evidence must be given to the police, and will he undertake to publish the report and evidence so that we can all see at the end of this affair that it has been done?
Well, I think one can draw a conclusion, if I may say so, from the fact that the Cabinet Office, in their liaison with the Metropolitan Police, have, according to the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, satisfied her that an investigation should take place, and that should give comfort to those who might otherwise doubt the investigation, that it is a proper and due process investigation. And as in all cases where due process should be followed in the interests of fairness, it would not be appropriate to presuppose any result of a police investigation, or for that matter, of an independent Cabinet Office investigation. And as I've already said, I would expect the findings to be published in due course.
Shelly's father.
Would my right honourable friend agree with me that it is a long-standing convention in this House that when there are independent inquiries and investigations, they are allowed to run their course and prejudgments aren't made in this House? Yeah. Given that is the case, and it would be advisable that that convention be carried on, would my right honourable friend also agree with me that we really do need to concentrate on matters that really affect our constituents on a day-to-day basis? Cost of living, energy prices, and so on, as well as the fact that there are 100,000 Russian troops on the Ukrainian border, which threatens global instability.
He makes a powerful point about the pressing international situation, particularly as regards Ukraine and Russia. And I know the Prime Minister is focused on that matter. I also understand the anxiety and indignation of many who are frustrated by the reports that have been emanating over a course of many weeks about alleged gatherings in the Downing Street area. The reality of the matter is the Prime Minister is focused, as he has been focused, on delivering for this country, as he's succeeded in delivering vaccines, as he's succeeded in delivering on the manifesto commitments, and he'll continue that laser focus.
David.
It's clear this government is now in total meltdown. Story after story about COVID laws being broken in number 10. Revelations about honourable members having constituency funding threatened by government whips. And now a Prime Minister and his staff under police investigation. In the midst of a pandemic and a cost of living crisis, and with Europe on the brink of war in Ukraine, we cannot go on with this chaotic government. No. Does the Minister accept that the Prime Minister's authority is in tatters? Will he advise his boss to do the right thing in the national interest and resign?
Minister.
Well, I thank him for his advice on propriety, but he will forgive me. He will forgive me if I decline to follow.
Mr. Speaker, will the Minister agree that anyone taking a view on the Prime Minister must take into account the fact that he's presided over the most successful vaccination programme in the world, which is taking us out of this pandemic ahead of most other countries in the world?
She's absolutely right. And we would be in lockdown now were it not for this Prime Minister.
Ben Bradshaw.
Mr. Speaker, is the Prime Minister not simply compounding his previous terrible mistakes by continuing to deny culpability, leading to an unnecessary and expensive police inquiry, when he could do the decent thing and resign?
Minister.
I'm sure he would expect fairness to apply to all in this country, whether it be one of his constituents or one of mine. And I would hope and expect that he would not wish to see unfairness to anyone. What we are doing is we are cooperating at the Cabinet Office with a police investigation. That will carry on and take its natural course, as police investigations invariably take their natural course in an orderly way, unencumbered by interference from the executive.
David Boris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Paymaster General consider the Metropolitan Police or any other police force looking into the activities of the Leader of the Opposition with his Beers party? As far as I can see, there's no difference. What would you say to that, Paymaster?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend makes an interesting point, but of course, police investigations and how they conduct themselves are operationally independent. I'm sure they will have heard what he said.
Pete Wishart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does he not think that it would be a good idea just to set up a police special operations unit and room in number 10 Downing Street? Because whilst they're looking at this one, they could perhaps look at cash for honours, cash for access, PPE for pals, paid advocacy, breaking the Ministerial Code, and just all the other general Tory badness.
Minister.
Well, I have to say, a quick Google analysis of the SNP would not be particularly edifying. But what I will say is that despite noises off, this Prime Minister is focused on what matters to the British people, and it's right that these matters conclude in an orderly way.
Graham Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome this investigation. But you can see the absolute terror. The terror on the benches opposite. For this, for them, Partygate, they know they're up against a Prime Minister and a government which has brought youth unemployment to its lowest ever level. A government and a Prime Minister, led by the Prime Minister, that of course brought us the AstraZeneca vaccine, has the most successful booster program in the world. And that is why, opposite absolute terror, that we should focus on policy in this place, focus on the priorities of the British people, and that's why they're so desperate to land this even as the inquiry goes ahead.
I agree completely, Mr. Speaker. The PM also welcomes the announcement by the Met Police today because it's alongside the Sue Gray inquiry, which the PM set up, I might add, that will offer the public the clarity they need to help draw a line under these events.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My Middlesbrough constituents have obeyed the rules and done exactly what the Prime Minister demanded of them and abided by the laws that he initiated. Doesn't the Paymaster General understand that the continued refusal to do the right and decent thing only serves to damage our democracy and tarnish our reputation across the world, and that will not be turned around until such time as the Prime Minister goes and brings this shameful business to an end?
Minister.
No, I don't agree with his characterisation.
Mr. Speaker, does the Paymaster agree? Does the Paymaster agree that compared with being interviewed under caution for flogging peerages, as Tony Blair was, compared with trying to prosecute a former First Minister of Scotland when they were told there was no evidence to do so, and compared with taking money from Chinese spies, that eating a piece of birthday cake is a relatively minor offence?
My friend makes his point powerfully and eloquently.
Geraint Davis.
Mr. Speaker, given that the police investigated and intervened in a number of parties across London on the 20th of May, can you explain, at the time, enormous amounts of booze has been trundled into number 10 with enormous amounts of noise, why they didn't intervene at the time? And does that make him fear about any sort of fudging of this investigation, and perhaps another police force should intervene?
Minister.
Well, I'm sorry he chooses to criticise the Metropolitan Police. I don't think that that would have the support of this House. Look, the position is, Mr. Speaker, that I would ask him to accept that the Metropolitan Police and those public servants who work in government, work hard, including over a period of major crisis for this country, in the public service. They're devoted to their work. They seek to serve the public in the best way they can, and assumptions ought not to be made either of police or civil service impropriety. The matter is subject to investigation, And I would ask him to accept, if you like, the default position, Mr. Speaker, that persons are innocent unless otherwise proved. That is how it works.
Jacob Young.
Mr. Speaker, last night NATO announced it was putting troops on standby in response to the situation in Ukraine. And in April, gas prices are currently forecast to rise by more than 50% when the energy price cap lifts. What people in Redcar and Cleveland want is to move on from this debacle on parties and focus on the real issues. So can he assure me that the Cabinet Office will publish Sugray's report as soon as they are able?
I completely agree with his position. I would say that the report of Sugray will be published, the findings of that report, as soon as they are available.
Janet Chard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Right Honourable Member for Gainsborough invited us to have a sense of proportion in relation to this matter. Can I just refer him to one of the many emails I've had from constituents in Edinburgh South West and ask the Minister what he thinks about it. This constituent said to me, if I hadn't followed the COVID restrictions like the Prime Minister, I would have driven to Norfolk to see my mum after she broke her leg and had to stay in a nursing home. I would have been able to go south to prepare a house. I could have helped cook and clean for her while we found suitable local carers. I could have sung her a happy birthday from the hospital grounds while she recovered from the COVID she caught from a carer. And I could have been with her when she died a few days later, 82 and alone in a ward of strangers. What should I say to my constituent? Should I tell him to have a sense of proportion? Apologise to him and all the other people across the United Kingdom who kept the rules when the Prime Minister and his mates didn't.
Minister.
I would invite her to offer to her constituent my abject sorrow and condolences for his loss. There is nothing that I can say to bring back that loss, but what I can say is that the Prime Minister, in his exercise of his functions over the course of this pandemic, has brought this country out of a dire situation into a situation now where we are leading the world in our arrangements around the pandemic, and where the Prime Minister will continue to focus on those priorities.
Philip Hollowell.
Could I welcome the Metropolitan Police inquiry and express surprise that it wasn't announced earlier? In his previous role as Attorney General, the Paymaster General will be more familiar than most with the COVID-19 regulations and the fixed penalty notices that have been issued. Can he confirm that they are summary offences normally investigated within 6 months and that the burden of proof is beyond reasonable doubt?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his question. I would prefer not to get into the legal position, as he can imagine, but what I would say is that I would expect, as would everyone, the police to conduct their investigation expeditiously, and they will do so at a time that, no doubt, is in accordance with their own procedures and protocols. He is right to raise the fact that there will be tests, evidence and burden of proof, and it is always right, of course, that a person in this country is innocent unless or until they be proven guilty.
I'm expecting to run this to about 1:15 so we can help each other by speeding through. Debbie Abrahams.
Mr. Speaker, what assessment has been undertaken on the damage that Partygate has on our economy, on inward investment, and on the trust that the British people have with this government?
Minister.
Well, can I invite, she asks what assessment has been made. Can I invite the House to note that this Prime Minister held a cabinet meeting the day after his own mother died, that he was working just weeks after he himself had been released from intensive care in hospital, that he has led the world on AstraZeneca, on vaccine availability, and we would still be in a lockdown situation if it were not for him. So I would invite her to accept those points are the points that will really focus the mind.
Giles Watling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that there are ongoing investigations by Sugray and the Metropolitan Police at this time, and we await those results, does my right honourable friend not agree that this urgent question itself is a vexatious waste of everybody's time.
The allowance of urgent questions are a matter.
Can I just say to the Minister, I'm sure he's not going to question my judgment because I'm the person that grants them, and I'm sure he'd like to withdraw that step, and it does need answering.
Mr. Speaker, at your behest, I withdraw the question.
Absolutely. Right, I'll listen through this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. One of my constituents, Billie Jean, was in touch. Billie Jean was in university accommodation during the pandemic and was fined £100 for having a gathering of 11 people during that pandemic. Billie Jean says that while they were being fined and disciplined by the university, the Prime Minister was living a lush life of champagne and party nibbles. Would the Minister like to apologise to my constituents and everybody else for having done one thing in Downing Street, while people in the world outside have done quite another?
No, her constituent would either, in order to have been fined, would admit wrongdoing or been found guilty in a court of law on the evidence before that court. So the situation is completely different. No such state of affairs exists as far as number 10 is concerned to the Prime Minister.
Mr. Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I fought in bloody conflicts in Europe, and at the moment we're seeing hundreds of thousands of Russian troops on the Ukrainian border, what could see the bloodiest conflict for generations. We're wasting time here, and every time Sorry, Mr. Speaker. Every time the opposition call for our Prime Minister to resign, does my right honourable friend agree that we're only strengthening Putin's hand and destabilising negotiations?
He is quite right to focus on what matters around the world and indeed to the Prime Minister of this country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every day my constituency of Birkenhead, parents are going hungry so that their children can eat, while elderly people are living in freezing homes because they simply can't afford to put the heating on. Will the Minister concede that this is more interested by its own internal turmoil than in helping the most in need? And will he now join call for the Prime Minister to step aside so that we can finally begin to get to grips with this soaring cost of living?
Minister.
As I said in this House last time, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is going nowhere.
Martin Docker to use.
Last night, Mr. Speaker, the food critic Jay Rayner quoted the late, great Julia Childs, who once said, "A party without a cake is just a meeting. Johnson's staffers supplied a cake, ergo, it was a party." I wonder if the Paymaster General agrees not only with Jay Rayner, but the late, great Julia Childs.
You're a pudding with that, Minister.
Well, if whilst at work someone eats a cake for 10 minutes, I don't think conclusions can be drawn from that. So he is putting the horse before the cart, or the cart before the horse, whatever the phrase.
Jenkinson.
Mr. Speaker, is it not the case that the opposition benches are in cahoots with media to undemocratically depose this Prime Minister, not because he's an electoral liability for them, for us, but because he's an electoral liability for them?
Minister.
Well, one has to wonder the focus of the party opposite on gatherings from 2 years ago, as alleged, when they're not focused on the Ukraine, on massing troops, Russian troops at the border of Europe, is quite extraordinary. What we're doing is we're focusing on the matters that really make a difference to the people of this country, whilst the police and the Cabinet Office continue their investigation.
Gardner.
What an insult. Given that it has taken 6 weeks since the Mirror first broke the story of parties in Downing Street to have a police inquiry, what consideration has the government given to appointing Pippa Crerar as the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police?
Well, I have no reason to be concerned about who the Metropolitan Police Commissioner is.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the weekend and the last couple of days, I've been out and about with my constituents in Great Grimsby, and they are sick and tired of listening to this
constant thread. And they are happy, very happy, that essential workers have gathered together for 2 years to get us through this pandemic. And would my right honourable friend send a message to the Prime Minister that they support his policies and they want him to carry on getting on with the job?
I will gladly send that message to the Prime Minister. And in fact, her message is very similar to messages that the Prime Minister is hearing from our colleagues around this House. And that is the focus that it matters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And does the Minister really think that it is in the interests of our country, not the Prime Minister, that he remain at the helm, giving public health advice to the people of Newcastle and security reassurances to the people of Ukraine, whilst mired in scandal and facing criminal investigation?
Minister.
I do, passionately. I think the Prime Minister is the best leader for this country, and he would bring to shame the party opposite and any offer that they might have as a leader of this country. The Prime Minister knows what matters. He focuses on the matters that are important to the British people. This investigation is also important, but it is being conducted by the Cabinet Office and the Metropolitan Police. We recognise the upset that has been caused by these allegations, and they are being properly investigated.
Alexander.
Speaker, I know myself, colleagues and constituents were shocked by alleged lockdown rule breaking by none other than the Leader of the Opposition, the Right Honourable, my gallant friend, Keir Starmer. Does my honourable friend agree with me that there can be no hypocrisy and all sides need to be investigated? Because after all, those in glass houses shouldn't throw beer bottles.
I'm sure hypocrisy wasn't aimed at an individual member, surely not. Minister, I think it's badly phrased.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, nothing in the law forbade people who were legitimately and genuinely at work from having a 10-minute coffee break in between meetings. And I'm sure people were doing that around the country, whether they ate cake with it or not. The reality of the matter is that his point was completely accurate.
Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Home Affairs Select Committee has been following the issue of the consistency of enforcement of COVID regulations, as we are well aware of how failure to do so can erode public trust. And the Home Affairs Select Committee will have an opportunity to ask questions of the Metropolitan Commissioner soon. But as the police have primary responsibility for criminal investigations in this country, does the Minister think that it would have been much better to have passed this on to the Metropolitan Police as soon as these allegations came to light, and that we would now be concluding that investigation by the Metropolitan Police, and he would have to stop coming to this House of Commons to defend the Prime Minister?
Well,
Minister,
I know that the Honourable Lady is a very fair chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, and she will acknowledge that the police have their job to do. It is not a matter for the government or the executive to refer matters. That has been done by the Cabinet Office independently as part of their investigation. And as to the length of the police investigation, we have no idea how long that will be.
Mike Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's clearly correct that the police should investigate any suspicions of breaches of the law, regardless of who may be involved. Can my right honourable friend assure this House and the country that Sue Gray is being left to conduct her investigation independently and freely, and that there are no barriers to her passing any information she may find that is relevant onto the police about any potential rule breaking?
Minister.
Yes, I can confirm that, and in fact, the fact that the Cabinet Office has passed matters to the Metropolitan Police is proven by today's news.
Oh, Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister explain to his less quick-witted colleagues that claimed good works on COVID are no excuse for breaking the law?
Well, no one is proved to have done what he alleges.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is absolutely right for there to be a full investigation into these matters, just as it was in terms of the police investigation into the Cash for Honour scandal under the Blair government. And can my right honourable friend assure me that the police will, of course, be given full cooperation in these matters, as they have been during the Cabinet Office investigation process?
Minister.
I can assure my friend that full cooperation will be accorded to the police as and if they ask for it.
Brendan McNeill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's quite clear that even after measures, the Prime Minister doesn't want to leave 10 Downing Street. But don't we face the possibility in the UK that the UK's PM might eventually be leaving 10 Downing Street in police handcuffs?
Yeah. Minister.
No.
Justin Mathers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 8th of December, the Prime Minister told this House, and I quote, "There was no party." Paragraph 1.3 of the Ministerial Code says anyone who knowingly misleads the House will be expected to resign. So why is the Prime Minister still in his job?
Minister.
Well, if a group of people gather for work, whilst at work they take cake for 10 minutes, then everyone working is permitted reasonable breaks as a part of their working day. So that's one possible interpretation. 10 minutes of eating cake and wishing someone a happy birthday would not a party make. But it is a matter for police investigation, and that is now what's happening.
Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Paymaster General for his response to the questions. Each day it now does seem to feel like there are new reports of a suspected lockdown breach. I am pleased, however, that investigations are underway by the Met Police. Can the Paymaster General confirm that any and all findings from these investigations will be disclosed to the media for public reassurance, and that this will be the case for all potential reports of breaches that may yet come before Sue Gray's investigations are included, and that justice will be done?
Minister.
I can assure him that the findings of Sue Gray's report will be put before this House.
Alex Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, the Paymaster General has been forced to come to the dispatch box to defend the indefensible, and no one is buying it. Honesty, transparency and leadership should be at the heart of this country's government, but it is severely lacking. So will the Prime Minister now come to this House to set the record straight, tell us exactly what gatherings and parties he attended at Downing Street, or better yet, will he just resign?
Well, I know she wishes to make political points, Mr. Speaker, but and it's kind of her to focus on my comfort, but I'm not forced to do anything. I'm here because I know the Prime Minister is entitled to the same justice as anyone else. And as far as the opposition are concerned, Mr. Speaker, it's unedifying to make party political points over this matter. The focus of this government is on the primary concerns, which are cost of living, employment, the economy, the situation in Ukraine and Russia, whilst the police and Cabinet Office conclude their investigation.
Robert Keeley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The police were asked to enforce COVID rules across the country, and they faced difficult challenges in doing so to keep us all safe, issuing tens of thousands of fines to people who broke the rules, even those gathering for birthdays. Does the Minister believe the Prime Minister is above the law? Because my constituents are asking why these events took place, disregarding the rules. And I say to those opposite who attacked this business today, these matters do concern our constituents. They do.
No one is above the law in this country.
Henry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Paymaster General doesn't want to speak about the specifics of this investigation. So can I ask him, for all the dodgy coronavirus contracts, the cash veronas from the Tories, the stated intention to break international law, illegally proroguing Parliament, and the many other crimes and misdemeanours of this government, does the Minister find it a tad ironic that it is the parties where they demonstrated their contempt for the public that has finally prompted the police to investigate?
If there's anything ironic, it is the Scottish National Party.
Can I remind the Minister, it started with a joke about a fictional party during a dummy press conference, then the faux outrage from the Prime Minister, who was angry about this joke. All the while, there were parties, lots of them, and he was at some of them. There's a mountain of evidence of truth-twisting, rule-bending and law-breaking, and it lands at the feet of the man at the top. So why is this Minister still defending the indefensible?
Minister.
I see the honourable gentleman wishes to be judge, jury and executioner, but no one in this House would give him that position. What matters is justice, justice for all, and that will apply in this case as it does in any other.
We now come to the statements. I now call the Prime Minister. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a few weeks ago, I commissioned an independent inquiry into a series of events in Downing Street and the Cabinet Office, as well as some other Whitehall departments that may have constituted potential breaches of the COVID regulations. That process has quite properly involved sharing information continuously with the Metropolitan Police, so I welcome the Met's decision to conduct its own investigation, because I believe this will help to give the public the clarity it needs and help to draw a line under matters. But I want to reassure the House, Mr. Speaker, and the country that I and the whole government are focused 100% on dealing with the people's priorities, including the UK's leading role in protecting freedom around the world. And with permission, I will make a statement about the United Kingdom's response to the situation in Ukraine. This winter, we've witnessed a spectacle that we hope to be banished from. A large and powerful country massing troops and tanks on the border of a neighbour with the obvious threat of invading. Russia has, of course, already attacked Ukraine, illegally annexing 10,000 square miles of her territory in 2014, igniting a war in the Donbass, and Ukraine has scarcely known a day of peace ever since. Now Ukraine faces the danger of a renewed invasion, and this time the force arrayed on Ukraine's frontier comprises over 100,000 troops, far bigger than anything Russia has deployed against her before. If the worst happens and the destructive firepower of the Russian army were to engulf Ukraine's towns and cities, I shudder to contemplate the tragedy that would ensue. Ukrainians have every moral and legal right to defend their country, and I believe their resistance would be dogged and tenacious, and the bloodshed comparable to the first war in Chechnya or Bosnia, Mr. Speaker, or any other conflict that Europe has endured since 1945. No one would gain from such a catastrophe. Russia would create a wasteland in a country which, as she continuously reminds us, is composed of fellow Slavs, and Russia would never be able to call it peace. For months, Britain has worked in lockstep with the United States and our allies across Europe to avoid such a disaster. We've sought to combine dialogue with deterrence, emphasizing how a united Western alliance would exact a forbidding price for any Russian incursion into Ukraine, including by imposing heavy economic sanctions. And at the same time, we stand ready, as we always have, to address any legitimate Russian concerns through honest diplomacy. On the 13th of December, I spoke to President Putin, and I stressed that NATO had no thought of encircling or otherwise threatening his country, and that Russia enjoyed as much right as any other state to live in peace and security. But as I said to him, Ukraine also enjoys an equal and symmetrical right to that of Russia. And I said that any attack on his neighbor would be followed by tougher sanctions against Russia, further steps to help Ukraine defend herself, and by an increased NATO presence to protect our allies on NATO's eastern flank. The truth is that Russia's goal is to keep NATO forces away from her borders. If that is Russia's goal, then invading Ukraine could scarcely be more counterproductive. My right honourable friends, the Foreign and Defence Secretaries, have both conveyed the same message to President Putin, and I'm prepared, of course, ready to speak to him again. Meanwhile, the American Deputy Secretary of State met her Russian counterpart in Geneva on the 10th of January, and the NATO-Russia Council gathered 2 days later, as the House knows. The American Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, met the Russian Foreign Minister last Friday, and the US administration has confirmed President Biden's willingness to have another meeting with President Putin, continuing the bilateral dialogue they began last year. But credible deterrence is the other side of the coin. Last night, I held a virtual meeting with President Biden, President Macron, Chancellor Scholz, President Duda, Prime Minister Draghi, General Secretary Stoltenberg, President Michel, and President von der Leyen. We agreed that we would respond in unison to any Russian attack on Ukraine, in unison by imposing coordinated and severe economic sanctions, heavier than anything we have done before against Russia. And we agreed on the necessity of finalizing these measures as swiftly as possible in order to maximize their deterrent effect. We in the UK will not hesitate to toughen our national sanctions against Russia in response to whatever President Putin may do, and the House will soon hear more on this from my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary. We've already declassified compelling intelligence exposing Russian intent to install a puppet regime in Ukraine, and we will continue to disclose any Russian use of cyber attacks, false flag operations, or disinformation. Amid all these pressures, Ukraine asks for nothing except to be allowed to live in peace and to seek her own alliances, as every sovereign country has a right to do. Last week, the UK acted to strengthen Ukraine's ability to defend her soil by supplying anti-armor missiles and deploying a small training team of British personnel, in addition to the work of Operation Orbital, which, as the House will know, has trained 21,000 Ukrainian troops since 2015. Yesterday, we took the responsible precaution of temporarily withdrawing some staff and dependents from the British Embassy in Kiev, though I emphasise that the embassy remains open and will continue to provide consular assistance for British nationals in Ukraine. And I'm particularly grateful for the dedication of our ambassador in Kiev, Melinda Simmons. I commend our NATO allies for the steps they've taken and are taking to protect the eastern flank of the alliance. Denmark is sending a frigate to the Baltic and more F-16s to Lithuania to join NATO's long-standing air policing mission. France has expressed its readiness to send troops to Romania under NATO command. And the United States has raised the alert level of 8,500 combat troops, preparing to deploy them in Europe at short notice. The British Army leads the NATO battle group in Estonia, and if Russia invades Ukraine, we would look to contribute to any new NATO deployments to protect our allies in Europe. In every contact with Russia, the UK and our allies have stressed our unity and our adherence to vital points of principle. We cannot bargain away the vision of a Europe whole and free that emerged in those amazing years from 1989 to 1991, healing the division of our continent by the Iron Curtain. We will not reopen that divide by agreeing to overturn the European security order because Russia has placed a gun to Ukraine's head. Nor can we accept the doctrine implicit in Russian proposals that all states are sovereign, but some are more sovereign than others. The draft treaty published by Russia in December would divide our continent once again between free nations and countries whose foreign and defense policies are explicitly constrained by the Kremlin in ways that Russia would never accept for herself. More than half of Europe, including a dozen or more members of NATO and of the European Union, would be only partially sovereign and required to seek the Kremlin's approval before inviting any military personnel from NATO countries onto their soil. The Czech Republic, at the very heart of Europe, hundreds of miles from Russia, would have to ask the Kremlin for permission if she wanted to invite a company of German infantry to join an exercise or even to help with flood defenses. There is nothing new about large and powerful nations using the threat of brute force to terrify reasonable people into giving way to otherwise completely unacceptable demands. But if President Putin were to choose the path of bloodshed and destruction, he must realize that it would be both tragic and futile. And nor should we allow him to believe that he could easily take some smaller portion of Ukraine to salami slice because the resistance will be ferocious. Anyone who has been to Kiev, as I have, and stood by the wall of remembrance, studied the portraits of nearly 4,500 Ukrainians who've died in defense of their country since 2014. The total death toll stands in excess of 14,000. Anyone who's been there will know that the Ukrainians are determined to fight and have become steadily more skilled at guerrilla warfare. And if Russia pursues this path, many Russian mothers' sons will not be coming home. And the response in the international community would be the same, and the pain that will be inflicted on the Russian economy will be the same. When I spoke to President Putin, I also reminded him that at crucial moments in history, Britain and Russia have stood together. The only reason why both our countries are permanent members of the UN Security Council is because of the heroism of Soviet soldiers in the struggle against fascism, side by side with ourselves. I believe that all of Russia's fears could yet be allayed, and we could find a path to mutual security through patient and principled diplomacy, provided that President Putin avoids the trap of starting a terrible war. And, Mr. Speaker, a war that I believe would earn and would deserve the condemnation of history, and I commend this statement to the House.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement. And I'm grateful to the Defence Secretary for keeping the opposition informed of developments throughout the crisis. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Britain, Russia and the United States made a solemn agreement with Ukraine. In exchange for giving up nuclear powers and weapons, Ukraine's security was to be guaranteed and its independence would be respected. Ukraine has kept its end of the deal. President Putin has not. His Russia has annexed Crimea, supported separatist conflict in Donbass, and now massed over 100,000 troops on Ukraine's borders. These are repeated and unjustifiable acts of aggression. So Labour stands resolute in our support of Ukraine's sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity. And that was made clear when our Shadow Foreign Secretary and Shadow Defence Secretary visited Kiev a fortnight ago, and I made it clear to the Ukrainian ambassador when I met him last week. This isn't just a local dispute on the other side of the continent. It's an attempt by President Putin to turn back the clock, to re-establish Russian force as a means of dominance over parts of Eastern Europe. And it's a direct threat to the anti-imperialist principle that sovereign nations are free to choose their own allies and choose their own way of life. That is why it is crucial that we in this House are united in opposing Russian aggression. So let me be clear. The Labour Party supports the steps that the government has taken to bolster Ukraine's ability to defend itself. We support international efforts to deter Russia from further aggression and the vital diplomatic efforts to de-escalate the situation. Can the Prime Minister assure the House that during talks, the UK and our partners will be resolute in our defence of Ukraine's sovereignty and the security of our NATO allies? For too long, the implicit message to Moscow has been that President Putin can do what he likes and the West will do little to respond. We must now change course and show Russia that any further aggression will result in severe real-world consequences. For Britain and our allies, that will mean taking tough decisions. That won't be easy. Widespread and hard-hitting sanctions must include cutting Russia's access to the international financial system. Europe's over-reliance on Russian energy supplies is well documented, and it simply must be addressed. And in Britain, we have failed to rid our economic and political systems of the ill-gotten money used to support the Putin regime. If we take our obligations to global security seriously, we cannot go on allowing ourselves to be the world's laundromat for illicit finance. Labour has a 4-point plan. Really? First, reform Companies House to crack down on shell companies. Second, a register of overseas entities to lift the veil on who owns property and assets in the UK. Thirdly, tougher regulation on political donations. And finally, implement the recommendations of the cross-party Russia support to bolster national security. So I ask, will the Prime Minister support these measures to rid the UK of the loot of the corrupt Russian elite? We cannot stand up to Russian aggression abroad while facilitating Russian corruption at home. After the chemical attacks in Salisbury, after the annexation of Crimea, and now the threat of invasion in Ukraine, it's time to send a simple, clear and united message. We support Ukraine's sovereign right to choose her own destiny. We will stand with the Ukrainian people in the face of President Putin's threats. His aggression will come at a high price for himself and his regime. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I thank the right honourable gentleman, and I must say that I'm very glad that he supports the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. And he's right to ask about the assurances that this country has given to Ukraine. And I must say that I have repeatedly told Volodymyr Zelensky, as I told his predecessor Petro Poroshenko many times, we stand foursquare behind the independence and sovereignty of Ukraine, Mr. Speaker, and we always will. And we have a hard-hitting package of sanctions ready to go. What I think would be fair to say is we want to see our European friends ready to deploy that package as soon as there should be any incursion at all by Russia into Ukraine. He asks about what we're doing to track down Russian money in this country and in this city. As he knows, we're bringing forward measures for a register of beneficial interest, Mr. Speaker, but I don't think there's any country in the world that has taken tougher action against the Putin regime. It was this government that brought in Magnitsky sanctions against all those involved in the poisoning of Alexei Navalny, Mr. Speaker, and it was this government that got the world together, got 28 countries together to protest against the poisoning that took place in Salisbury. And the world responded to that British lead, Mr. Speaker, by collectively expelling 153 diplomats around the world. And what I can tell him, Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to him for the general tenor of his intervention and for the support that he is giving to NATO, belated though it may be from the benches opposite. I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for it now, Mr. Speaker. And what I can tell him now, Mr. Speaker, is that that same leadership in assembling a response to Russian aggression is being shown by the UK now, and it is absolutely vital that the world, the West, is united now, because it is our unity now that will be much more effective in deterring any Russian aggression, and that is what this government will be pursuing in the days ahead.
Tobias Elwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Prime Minister articulates, the West is now regrouping, but the penny is also dropping. The threat of sanctions will not deter this Russian aggression, and a total or even partial invasion will have severe economic and security consequences felt right across Europe and beyond. Ukraine's grain exports will be affected towards Africa. Global gas prices will be impacted and skyrocket. And where might an emboldened Russia turn to next? So I ask the government to liaise with the United States and now consider a more simpler and effective option to deter this invasion by belatedly answering Ukraine's call for help. It is not too late to mobilize a sizable NATO presence in Ukraine, utilizing the superior hard power the alliance possesses to make Putin think twice about invading another European democracy.
Prime Minister.
I thank him very much, and I know that he will, emotionally, many people will share what my honourable friend says, and he knows a great deal about Ukraine and about the issues that country faces. And of course, instinctively, many people would yearn to send active physical support in the form of NATO troops to Ukraine. I have to tell him that I don't believe that to be a likely prospect in the near term. Ukraine is not a member of NATO, but what we can do and what we are doing is sending troops to support Ukraine. I've mentioned the training operations that we're conducting under Operation Orbital, have done for the last 6 or 7 years, trained 21,000 Ukrainian troops. And of course, we are now sending defensive weaponry, Mr. Speaker, defensive weaponry, which I think is entirely appropriate. 2,000 anti-tank weapons to the Ukrainians. And we join the Americans in that effort. As he knows, the Americans have sent about $650 million worth of military assistance to Ukraine. That is a vital thing to do, to stiffen Ukrainian resistance. But I think the real deterrent right now, Mr. Speaker, is that package of economic sanctions. That is what will bite, that is what will hurt Putin, and that, I hope, is what will deter him.
Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement, and join with the Leader of the Opposition in congratulating the Defence Secretary, who has made sure all through this that we've been kept informed of developments. It's most appreciated. And it is important, Mr. Speaker, that all of us in this House stand together in solidarity with our friends in Ukraine in defence of their sovereignty. We on these benches share the deep concern over the escalation of tension, the prospect of military aggression, and that threat to Ukraine's sovereignty. Russia's actions in recent weeks and months of amassing troops, tanks and heavy military equipment near the border of Ukraine are unacceptable. We continue to support, above all, measures to resolve the crisis through diplomacy. So will the Prime Minister provide reassurance that work to deliver a peaceful and diplomatic outcome remains this government's main priority? The threat of bloodshed on European soil is what's at stake. As we stand with the people of Ukraine and understand the fears and concerns of Ukrainians across these islands, many of them who live in the UK but have family in Ukraine, the bedrock of NATO as a defensive alliance remains the solidarity between its member states, and it is clear that we need that united alliance. It is becoming increasingly apparent that should an incursion occur, what will be required is a tougher package of sanctions that are robust and that have real measurable impact. We on these benches have called for coordinated economic sanctions against the Putin regime and the banning of Russia from the SWIFT banking system. Can this be confirmed as being on the table today? These measures must also include tougher action on Russian money laundering and include action by the Treasury to tackle the ongoing and improper use of Scottish limited partnerships, which have been used to funnel millions of pounds in money. Without this, our credibility lessens. And let me say to the Prime Minister, when he raised the issue of Majinsky, it was cross-party support that led to these sanctions. And he may well remember the meeting that I had with him when he was Foreign Secretary, to make sure that we work collectively to deal with those threats. So will the Prime Minister also commit to introduce a transparent system of company registration and proper reform of companies' groups? Meanwhile, we all stand solidly with the people of Ukraine and urge the government to continue efforts for diplomacy as long as that is possible.
Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the right honourable gentleman to echo many of his sentiments, and he's completely right to say that we should pursue every possible diplomatic avenue in every appropriate forum, Mr. Speaker, whether it's the NATO-Russia Council, the UN, the OSCE, the G7, the Normandy format. We must follow every avenue. He's right to press on what we're doing to track dirty Russian money, for want of a better expression. That's why we have the unexplained wealth orders, and that's why we're bringing in measures to have a register of beneficial interest. He asks about SWIFT and financial transactions across the world, and there is no doubt that would be a very potent weapon. I'm afraid it can only really be deployed with the assistance of the United States, though we are in discussions about that. I think the House needs to understand that one of the big issues that we all face in dealing with Ukraine and in dealing with Russia is the heavy dependence of our European friends in particular on Russian gas. And it was clear in the conversations last night that in this era of high gas prices, we are bumping up against that reality. So the job of our diplomacy now is to persuade and encourage our friends to go as far as they can to sort this out and to come up with a tough package of economic sanctions, because that is what the situation requires.
Chair of the Select Committee, Tom Tugendhat for Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend will remember when he was Foreign Secretary, the Foreign Affairs Committee published a report entitled Moscow's Gold about dirty Russian money flowing through our system, and the call for us to have various registers of not only ownership but also foreign agents operating within our system. We've had a reminder only a week ago of why this is so important. Would he tell me what he is doing to work with partners across Europe to make sure that we stand together and do not just act as a voice outside the Kremlin, but make sure that Putin's acolytes who have profited from his kleptocratic regime act as voices inside the Kremlin, telling Putin what he is risking, because the impressive work that the Defense Secretary has done in helping to support our Ukrainian friends could be undermined if the Kremlin doesn't listen to the very real danger that it faces today.
Well,
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is absolutely right that the best way to get attention in the Kremlin and in Moscow generally is to have sanctions that are directed at the individual, like Magnitsky sanctions, for instance. But that is what we will be coming forward with, as well as sanctions that are directed at companies, Mr. Speaker, that are of crucial strategic Russian interest.
Chris Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Kiev and Kramatorsk last week, we met politicians and community leaders who will not only be worrying for the future of their country, but will be worrying for they'll be fearful for their own lives. And I've been arguing for a very long time that the arguments that President Putin uses about Russian speakers in Ukraine are exactly the same as Adolf Hitler advanced over the Sudeten Germans in Czechoslovakia in the 1930s. I agree with the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee that we do need to see full implementation of the Moscow Gold report. I'm sure there will be other sanctions coming. I don't quite understand why we've only sanctioned 25% of the people that the American government have already sanctioned. But this House will stand ready alongside the Prime Minister if he needs to introduce further legislation, for instance, to seize Russian assets in the UK and to make sure that the unexplained wealth orders, which have only worked in 3 cases in the last 4 years, actually have an effect. We stand ready to stand by the Ukrainian people.
Prime Minister.
I thank him very much, and I think he's completely right in what he says. His analysis of Russian, certainly of Putin's intentions towards Ukraine. I'm sure he's read the 5,000-word essay by Vladimir Putin about Ukraine and the origins of Russia. It's clear what his psychological, what his emotional wellsprings of his thinking are. On sanctions, I'm grateful for what he says. We're bringing forward, as he knows, a statutory instrument greatly to toughen up the package of our ability to sanction people, and I hope he will support it.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. President Putin hasn't even waited for the gas to start flowing through the Nord Stream 2 pipeline before exploiting the stranglehold that has been building on the German economy. My right honourable friend has already indicated that it may be difficult for Germany to impose severe sanctions against Russia if this invasion goes ahead. So does he not agree with me that it is vital from our security point of view that anyone with strong Russian or communist Chinese links should be kept well away from our own critical national infrastructure?
Prime Minister.
My right honourable friend is completely right, and that's why we brought in measures to protect our national security, our national infrastructure, our critical national infrastructure, and to make sure that we are able to stop investment that we think will be detrimental to our national security, Mr. Speaker. And I'm afraid he's quite right to also what he says about the German dependence on Russian gas. We have to be respectful of this. The simple fact is that the UK, I think, of our gas, 3% comes from Russia. About 6% of German energy needs comes from Russian gas. So they are in a very different position from us. Their sacrifice is potentially very large, but we must hope that in the interest of peace, they're willing to make that sacrifice.
Ed Day. Can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement? It is right that we stand united across the House to support Ukraine and to stand against Russian aggression, which we should remember has already resulted in over 13,000 casualties in the last few years. The Prime Minister has rightly talked about gas being an issue in this debate, particularly on Russia, but indeed in Germany, but across Central and Eastern Europe. And it will also potentially impact this country with the threat of increased gas prices at a time when families are already facing rocketing heating bills. So could I ask him to take further action on energy, as I did during the Russian invasion of Crimea? And so, alongside all the measures he rightly proposed in his statement, will the Prime Minister convene a summit of G7 energy ministers, as we had back in 2014, to look at how we can improve short-term and medium-term energy security, protect consumers in this country and elsewhere against rocketing gas prices, and give ourselves a much stronger hand in the face of Putin's aggression?
Prime Minister.
I thank him also, by the way, Mr. Speaker. I think that much of the work that he did on renewables when he was in office was prescient and valuable for this country, and it's put us in a stronger position to resist the Russian gas blackmail. As I told the House just now, of our gas supplies, only 3% comes from Russia. But he's also right about the spike in prices. That's why we're working together with President Biden, with other colleagues, to see what we can do to increase the supply of gas, both to Europe and of course to this country as well.
Carl McCartney.
Thank you, Speaker. If Russia invades Ukraine, does my right honourable friend see the potential, as I do, that it will lead to a flood of refugees crossing from the Ukraine into the EU? So Poland, Romania and Slovakia could see massive flows of displaced people. Indeed, that may be a part of Putin's thinking. The EU is then so distracted and full of infighting refugees that it cannot respond militarily. What does my right honourable friend think the response from Brussels is going to be? Maybe the Poles should have a bus station at the border crossing ready to take them all to Germany and France, especially given it is Berlin and Paris that have watered down any NATO response thus far. Because if this massive flow of refugees happens, it may well be the end of the EU.
My honourable friend is making a very valuable point, because of course we have seen only recently how refugees from Belarus have been used as tools of political warfare, and we've got to be conscious of the potential of the Kremlin to trigger exactly the kind of refugee crisis that he describes.
Kevan Jones.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and agree with him that should Putin invade Ukraine, tough sanctions will be necessary. But the Putin regime relies and exists because it floats on an ocean of illegal and illicit finance, much of it that flows through the City of London. Now, the Prime Minister just said that the UK has the strongest laws against illicit money. I'm sorry, Prime Minister, that's just not true. Just look at what our allies in the United States are doing. Yeah. It is now time to attack that. That is the way to actually cripple this regime. And can you tell me when he is going to implement the Russia report and the recommendations? Because as my honourable friend from Rwanda said, if that needs emergency legislation to get it through, let's do it.
Prime Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, forgive me. I want to repeat what he's right that it's vital to guard against Russian dirty monies flowing through the world, and he's completely right in his analysis of the way the kleptocracy works. That's why we have the unexplained wealth orders. That's why we're bringing forward a register of beneficial interests, and we have a new corporate offence for failure to prevent tax evasion. Madam Deputy Speaker, and we will come down, and we do come down very hard on all those who are exploiting the City of London or anywhere else to wash dirty money.
Mark Pritchard.
The Prime Minister strongly underlining Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Just back in November, Madam Deputy Speaker, there was no unanimity across Europe, increase even across the Atlantic on the issue of Ukraine. That has changed since over the last few months with the good offices of the Prime Minister's Office, Defence Secretary and Foreign Secretary. He mentions his conversation last night with Chancellor Olaf Scholz. The Germans are a critical part of all of this, both on diplomacy and defence. They are a key international partner and ally. We can do it with the Americans, we can do it with others, but it would be far more effective if we do it with the Germans.
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is completely right. And I just want to say a word or two in praise of Olaf Scholz, because last night in conversation with him, it was clear, as I've said to the House, how difficult this is for Germany. Nobody should be any doubt about that. But it was also clear that the new German Chancellor is determined to stand with the rest of the West, to have a united front. And amongst other things, of course, Germany has made it clear that Nord Stream 2 cannot go, they can't take part in Nord Stream 2 if there's a Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Ben Bradshaw.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister was absolutely right to say that Western unity is key. So could you explain why the UK began withdrawing some of our diplomats from Kiev this week, unlike most of the rest of NATO?
Prime Minister.
I thank him. We're actually in lockstep with the United States, and as he knows, we've kept at least 30 of our diplomats there, including Melinda Simmons, our outstanding ambassador. The UK presence continues to be very strong in Kiev, but those are sensible precautionary steps.
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I say to my honourable friend, first of all, I congratulate him and the Defence Secretary, the Foreign Secretary, for a very robust set of leadership with NATO and our European allies and with the United States. But does he not also agree that right now we are facing an even wider threat? Whilst it's Ukraine today, the powers of dictatorship have watched as we did nothing over Georgia, over Crimea, South Ossetia, and they've been encouraged. Even now, China is looking at Taiwan, watching what our reaction will be. Does he not agree now that we have to get our allies to recognize we must never put ourselves in a position when it comes to energy such that we are dependent on these terrible regimes for our future? We need to get security in our energy now.
Prime Minister.
My right honourable friend is completely right in what he says about the need for us to guarantee the independence of our energy. That's why it's so vital that we're building our wind power and other renewables so fast, Madam Deputy Speaker. But he's also right in his analysis of what is happening. What Putin basically wants is to go back to the Yalta system of spheres of influence. And it's not just Ukraine, Madam Deputy Speaker, that he has his eye on. And therefore, this moment now matters for the whole geometry and security architecture of Europe, and we must stand firm.
Order. Short and concise questions, please, because I will be finishing this statement at 2:20. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. The military reality is that President Putin knows that if he invades, he will not be facing NATO troops, and therefore the sanctions we put in place have to be the strongest possible. Is the Prime Minister not concerned that, given the answer he just gave about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, the fact that discussions are still continuing about exclusion from the SWIFT system, that we're not demonstrating determined, united resolve at the very moment where we need the credible threat of strong sanctions to try and deter him from invading Ukraine?
Prime Minister.
I thank him. I think his point is very important. Actually, I think that we are making a huge amount of progress. And I want to thank my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary and Defence Secretary, for the work that they're doing, because I think we are bringing together the West on a very tough package, and that's what we need.
Bob Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I remind the House that we do actually guarantee the sovereignty of Ukraine by having signed the Budapest Memorandum in 1994, along with the United States and Russia, and I think later France and even China. But could I ask my right honourable friend if he agrees with me that if we really economically and financially strangle Russia with sanctions, Russia could well become bankrupt, and this alone might be something to cause Mr. Putin to blink before he gives agreement to using military power and turning it into military force.
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is completely right that we have the potential to do very serious economic damage to Russia. And what we have to make sure, as everybody said on the call last night, is that we don't inflict damage on the Western economies, just as people are suffering, in particular, from high gas prices. And that's what we've got to do. Don't forget, he's quite right. 41% of Russia's GDP comes from oil and gas.
Alison Toulis.
Speaker, the truth about unexplained wealth orders is that only a handful of them have been issued, and the registration of overseas entities bill has now been waiting for 4 years for action. So when the finance bill returns to this House, will the government bring forward measures to tighten up on the flow of dirty Russian money in the UK? Or is the truth really that he's perfectly content with this because so much of it appears to end up in Tory-party coffers?
Prime Minister.
No, Madam Deputy Speaker, we do not accept foreign donations, as she knows very well. And what we will do is bring forward targeted sanctions, which I think are the most effective way of doing it, targeting the sanctions at the personalities that surround President Putin and making them understand the price that they will pay.
Andrew Morrison.
Madam Deputy Speaker, there's no public appetite for using UK combat troops in Ukraine, absolutely none. But we do have other tools in our toolbox. Is the Prime Minister contemplating using the full spectrum approach to cyber, including offensive cyber, that he talked about in March in connection with the integrated review?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Madam Deputy Speaker, the NCSC, the National Security Cybersecurity Centre, is indeed offering help to Ukraine for precisely that purpose. Russian cyber attacks, as the House knows, can be extremely damaging, and we can do a lot to help.
Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The government's position is that sanctions will be deployed against Russia if there is an incursion. But would the government consider deploying some sanctions now as a clear signal to Russia, and to say if President Putin stands down his troops and withdraws his forces, then further sanctions will not be deployed? Would that not be a more effective sequencing of the process?
I thank him for his thoughtful argument. We already have, as I've said, Madam Deputy, we already have Magnitsky sanctions, various sanctions already in place on the Russian regime, sanctions in response to the siege of Crimea and Sevastopol, already in place, a wide variety of sanctions. I think what we need to do, if I may say so, is build up that instant automatic package of sanctions, of Western sanctions, that will come in automatically in the event of a single toe-cap of a Russian incursion into more of Ukraine.
Jackie Doyle-Price.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the robust sentiment behind my right honourable friend's statement. And indeed, it's important that the unity across this House is expressed in opposition to Putin if we are going to make a reality of that. But my right honourable friend mentioned in his opening remarks Bosnia, and he will be aware of the saber rattling happening in Republika Srpska, encouraged by Russia. He will also be aware that there is still occupied territory in Moldova. And could he reassure me that these areas are also in discussion with the Allies?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes an excellent, Madam Deputy Speaker, I said, makes an excellent point. And this crisis around Ukraine is one that will be replayed across the whole map of Eastern Europe, Madam Deputy Speaker, if we fail now, if we don't stand up to Putin. She's entirely right about what she says about the Balkans.
Jamie Stone.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Not just Ukraine. We have our military forces in Estonia. Estonia is a member of NATO and a true friend of the UK. The Prime Minister said that if Russia invades Ukraine, we will then bolster up our NATO allies. Should we not have more forces in Estonia now?
A very good point, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've been to see the 850 troops in Tapa. I'm sure he has as well. They do a fantastic job in Estonia. What we're looking to do is potentially to increase our presence in the NATO southeastern flank as well.
Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend for his statement, which puts the United Kingdom at the forefront of the response to President Putin's monstrous military intimidation?
Yeah.
And can he personally pledge himself to the defence of the new democracies of Eastern Europe who suffered under the Soviet yoke for so long and still want to be free? And will he acknowledge that this cannot be a change just if the invasion takes place? The change must happen anyway. We must make sure that we are prepared in a new Cold War against this kind of intimidation until the Russian regime is removed.
Prime Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend, and I know that he speaks for many friends and many good allies in Eastern Europe, in Poland, in the Czech Republic, in the Baltic states. There are people who would precisely echo his sentiments, and that's why we have to stand strong and united today for Ukraine.
Neil Coyle.
Prime Minister describes Ukraine and Russia as equal parties, and we know he likes a party. But he also said Ukraine scarcely known a day of peace since the 2014 Russian invasion and illegal annexation. Indeed, in December, there were 128 shellings of Ukrainians in Donetsk, and 3 Ukrainian soldiers have been murdered by Russian backed forces since January. So the question is, why has he not acted sooner? And why is he even now saying we must wait for full-scale invasion before further sanctions, including access to SWIFT, and implementing the Moscow Gold and Russian report recommendations takes place? Why wait?
Prime Minister.
I'm afraid that I think the Honourable must have missed what I already said. We already have a very wide package of sanctions in place since the Russian incursion of 2014. We have sanctions, personal sanctions and other sanctions for what they did in Crimea and Sevastopol, and what we're going to do now is ratchet those sanctions up very, very considerably. And I'm afraid he's not right in what he says about leaving Ukraine alone or abandoning Ukraine since 2014. Operation Orbital, the UK has been out there in the front, helping to train Ukrainian troops, 21,000 of them since 2015, Madam Deputy Speaker.
James Sunderland.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you. The Prime Minister will know, of course, that Ukraine is not a full member of NATO. But could I please ask him to comment on the feasibility of direct military action by NATO, notwithstanding that Article 5 does not apply?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him very much, and I want to really to go back to the answer I gave to the right honourable gentleman for Bournemouth. I know that many people emotionally will want to commit NATO troops to the defence of Ukraine. We have UK troops there now. Members of the Ranger Regiment are going to supplement those we already have. But I have to say that there is no member of NATO that is currently willing to deploy in Ukraine in large numbers to fight Russian aggression in the way that he suggests. The best thing, and indeed we have to beware of doing things, Madam Deputy Speaker, that would constitute a pretext for Putin to invade. We have to calculate and calibrate what we do very carefully. And I think building a strong package of economic sanctions, continuing to supply defensive weaponry, and all the other things that we're doing, that's the right package.
Stuart Hosey.
Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister said we have already declassified the compelling intelligence exposing Russian intent, and he said we will continue to disclose any Russian use of false flag operations or disinformation. How much of that declassified information will be made fully public so as to blunt or halt the spread of Russian disinformation by letting people who see it know that it's false before they decide to press the share or send button?
Minister.
Well, he makes an excellent point, of course, because it's very, very important that people in Ukraine and around the world should be able to trust the information that we're giving out. I've no doubt that the intelligence that we shared about the coup attempt in Kiev was right, or the people who are conspiring against the regime was right. But we will divulge as much of our sourcing as we can without compromising our intelligence sources.
Alan Cairns.
Speaker. We're all naturally alarmed and share concerns at the risks that people of Ukraine face, but take confidence from the Prime Minister's statement and actions in helping coordinate the Western response. But does my right honourable friend agree with me that NATO must always leave the door open for Ukraine joining?
Yes.
Prime Minister.
My right honourable friend is completely right, and he puts his finger on the fundamental point and the thing that we cannot bargain away. A sovereign country must have the right to choose her own destiny, choose its own. That's what Ukraine must have. Of course, the path to NATO membership will not be easy for anybody, and it's not. No one is saying that that is going to happen immediately. But a country must be allowed to choose its own way forward, and that's what we're sticking up for.
Stephen Farrow.
Thank you very much. Any Russian invasion of Ukraine would be a very serious breach of the terms of the United Nations Charter. In 2014, the seizure of Crimea was discussed in the Security Council, I think, on 7 occasions, and eventually a resolution was passed through the General Assembly, which left Russia extremely isolated. So what plans does the government have to pursue this current crisis through the UN, and given the reality of a Russian veto on the Security Council, to perhaps look once again to the General Assembly?
Prime Minister.
I think the honourable gentleman is completely right, and I think that it is an underestimated point in our favour that I don't believe in the end that Russia wants the kind of isolation that would ensue. I think Russia does. One of the global institutions, Russia takes the UN very seriously. Russia values her membership of the UN Security Council. And I think what he proposes about using the General Assembly is entirely right. But it's very important that we not only have tough measures, but we also provide the avenue for diplomacy as well.
Jane Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to thank the Prime Minister for sending such a strong and clear message to Vladimir Putin and for everyone across this House in backing the Prime Minister on such a crucial issue. At such a worrying time, can the Prime Minister reassure British nationals in Ukraine that our embassy in Kiev remains open to provide assistance should they require it?
Prime Minister.
Yes, and I'm very happy to give that reassurance. As I said just now, the embassy continues to function. At least 30 staff are there to look after British interests in Kiev and around Ukraine.
Pollard.
Speaker, the Kremlin does not act in isolation, it acts against the plan. So can the Prime Minister set out what additional support we'll be providing to our allies on NATO's eastern flank, especially using UK forces that are already stationed in those countries to deter any future Russian aggression after any invasion of Ukraine?
Prime Minister.
Thank you. Well, he's making a very important point that what we all are discussing at the moment is what we can do to fortify NATO's eastern, southeastern flank. The French are looking at Romania. There are questions about Hungary and what we might do there. Which, of course, there are complex issues, as he knows, involving the Hungarian minority in Ukraine. Everybody can see the need now to move NATO forces, particularly the Americans. You heard what I said about the 8,500 troops. They're getting ready to go to Europe. Everybody can see the need to fortify NATO's eastern flank.
Richard Drax.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The diplomacy of the velvet glove must be supported by a steel fist if it's to be effective. Does this threat to NATO indirectly inform the Prime Minister that perhaps NATO must spend more money on its conventional forces? And in that regard, would he reconsider the cut to our army of 10,000?
Minister.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have spent record sums on our wonderful army, and it is more agile, more lethal, more deployable around the world. That's why we're able to move at speed, to deploy not just in Estonia, but as I was saying to the gentleman opposite, we will look to move to other parts of of NATO's eastern frontier as well.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister, the MOD and FCDO Secretary of State for their resolute and strong stance. UK, NATO and USA have committed troops to the Balkan states, to Poland, and to combat and stop Russian aggression. Similar support needs to be given to the Ukraine. In the pictures last week in the press, it showed the Ukraine militia training with wooden guns. Can I ask, and very much illustrates the David and Goliath struggle, can the Prime Minister confirm that military assistance and boots on the ground are what is needed urgently and right now in the Ukraine. Thank you.
Yes, I saw those pictures too of Ukrainians training Ukrainian civilians training with wooden weapons. And I can tell him that we are supporting the Ukrainian army, and there is a strong tradition now in Ukraine of militias, of people who understand how to fight a guerrilla war. And I think the message we need to get across to the Russian people is that this would be a disaster for them and a political disaster for Vladimir Putin.
Jonathan Ginocchia.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In his very strong statement, my right honourable friend quite rightly spoke about the need for Western unity. So of all countries in Europe, it does seem bizarre that Germany needs to be reminded that murderous dictators will never be satisfied with a single land grab, and that any attack on Ukraine is an attack ultimately on all of Europe. Will my right honourable friend be reminding the Germans of this?
Prime Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend, and he and I have discussed these types of issues over many years. Actually, I think that given the extreme delicacy of the matter in Germany, given the dependence that I've described to the House on Russian hydrocarbons, actually, I really think that Olaf Scholz is doing a huge job of moving and getting us to a position where we have a united Western approach, and that I commend the German government.
Malcolm McDonald.
I'm grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker. For reasons we don't need to go over just now, Germany has blocked some NATO allies from providing certain military assistance to Ukraine. What assessment has the government made of that blocking? And where it is necessary for Ukraine to defend itself, will the UK government, along with others, ensure that it gets the maximum spread of capability that we're able to provide it with?
Prime Minister.
Well, he makes a very important point, of course, but as he knows, and as I've told the House, the NLAWs that we've sent, in addition to all the aid we've given under Operation Orbital, we're the second biggest contributor to the defence of, I stress the defence of Ukraine. And I think I saw a poll of the Ukrainian people, which said that the UK was now the most popular government in Ukraine, other foreign governments, not second only to the Scottish government, but second only to Lithuania, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Robert Chenry.
The UK has proven to be the preeminent European nation in supporting and defending the Ukraine, and so I thank my right honourable friend for his leadership on that. Nobody could doubt our commitment to European security, and I've been encouraged by the remarks he's already made with respect to Germany, but it is critical that the German government play a full part if we're going to deliver the unprecedented package of financial and other sanctions that he's described and was set out in the call last night. How confident is he of that, and what more can he do with Chancellor Schulz to ensure that's delivered?
Prime Minister.
He's right. Germany is absolutely critical for our success in this. We've just got to keep the pressure up together.
Leila Moran.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I heard what the Prime Minister said earlier about introducing a register for beneficial interests. But my question to him is when? Because it's been 6 years that it was promised at that dispatch box. He said it to the Leader of the Opposition. 6 years since it was promised. Nothing has happened. Every moment we wait undermines our position. I've laid the bill. It's got support from both sides. Please, will he take it up? We need to send the message that cronies' money is not welcome in this country.
She's completely right. But in addition to the unexplained wealth orders and the crackdown on tax evasion, we do want to register a beneficial interest. And I can tell her that my right honourable friend, the Leader of the House, tells me we will do it as soon as parliamentary time allows.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have a vibrant Ukrainian community in my Colne Valley constituency. I met with many of them earlier this month. Will the Prime Minister please reassure my constituents of our commitment to the defence support package for Ukraine, our readiness to unleash economic sanctions on Russia, and also stand firm for freedom and democracy alongside the Ukrainian people?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the UK has been at this for a long time now, and I think it was an important signal that I hope he will take back to his constituents that we stuck up for Ukrainian rights of navigation when we sent HMS defender. Through that route, if you remember, the government came under some pressure from people for taking what was described as a provocative route. All we were doing, Madam Deputy Speaker, was sticking up for the rights of freedom of navigation for the Ukrainians.
Alan Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Russian regime is a clear and present danger to the rules-based international order, so the SNP will be part of the coalition in Ukraine's defence. But in that spirit, would the Prime Minister accept the real frustration on this side of the House that his own credibility, the credibility of his own government and all of us has been undermined by continued inaction in implementing the Moscow's Gold Report and the Russia Report? We would support the legislation to strengthen his own credibility. Let's get on with it.
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't think that's fair. The government has been absolutely ruthless in implying Magnitsky sanctions, which his right honourable friend helped to promote. It was my right honourable friend, the Lord Chancellor, who produced them. They're a great thing. We've targeted people involved in the poisoning of Alexei Navalny, and we will use direct targeted sanctions now against the Putin regime.
Mr. Beckham.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Ukraine has very strong historical and cultural links to my constituency of Kensington, with the Ukrainian Embassy, the Cultural Centre and the Ukrainian Institute, all based in Holland Park. Can my right honourable friend assure me that we will do everything to support the people of Ukraine in their desire to live in peace?
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, Madam Mayor. I'm familiar with the statue of, I think, some Volodymyr in her constituency, and I know the amazing contribution of the Ukrainian community to our great capital, and I hope she will pass the message that we stand foursquare with them.
Madam Kaiser.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A percentage of our natural gas comes from Russia, and Putin has already said that he'll turn off the taps if he deems Moscow to have been unfairly sanctioned by the West. My constituents of Adrian Shotts are already struggling with rising fuel costs, and that's why I voted in the SNP increasing cost of living debate yesterday. Does the Prime Minister accept that he must bring in a package of policies to help families pay for bills on the domestic front so that this international does not compound the problem?
Prime Minister.
Well, Madam Deputy, she's quite right to draw attention to the price spike in energy around the world. Actually, Russian gas only comprises 3% of the UK's gas supplies, but what we've got to do is mitigate the impacts on families of the costs of energy with all the cold weather payments, everything that we're doing to increase the living wage, all the support that we're giving families throughout the winter and beyond.
Shahid Farah.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I commend my right honourable friend on his tough statement. The point has already been made about the disinformation that is coming from the Kremlin, but my right honourable friend will appreciate that a lot of that is targeted towards NATO itself. Would he use this opportunity to make it absolutely clear that NATO is a defensive organisation and that it should not in any way be construed as being offensive or threatening?
Yes, I thank my right honourable friend, and he's so right, because that is the misconception, whether it is witting or otherwise. Russia persists in the fiction that NATO is somehow an aggressive alliance and a threat to Russia. NATO is not an aggressive alliance. Russia is not encircled by threats. It's absolutely vital that we convey that to Vladimir Putin. And I think if he can understand that, that is the route to progress, and that is the diplomatic path that we've got to follow.
Dr. Hughes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister will get every support for defending national self-determination from these benches within Europe. But does he not agree it's now time that the UK government signed a robust security and defence agreement with the European Union to replace that signed in the Lisbon Treaty, critically, Article 42.7?
Prime Minister.
I thank him. Actually, if you look at what's happening, the conversation that I had last night with European partners comprised the vast bulk of defence spending in the West, and we work very closely with our European partners, as we do with all our NATO partners, and NATO remains the primary vehicle for our defence, and NATO is a very valuable interlocutor with Russia, and the NATO-Russia Council has proved its worth in the last few months.
Philip Hollowbone.
this the wake-up call that NATO needs so that all its members finally meet their obligations to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defence?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is completely right, because I think, as so many colleagues have said, this is not just about Ukraine. This is about the ambition of the Kremlin to seize this moment to try to reimpose a new order, a new security architecture in the European continent, one that we absolutely reject, Madam President. We stand for the rights of free peoples everywhere to determine their own fate. That was the fantastic achievement of the end of the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, that high moment in 1990 when we had a Europe whole and free. That's what we're trying to protect.
Last question, Margaret Ferrier.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There are reports of some Ukrainians beginning to stock up in non-perishable goods. Can the Prime Minister confirm that the government has plans in place to support provision of necessities to ordinary Ukrainian people if necessary?
Of course, we will do what we can to provide economic support in the event of a disaster, but the most important thing we can do now is try to prevent that disaster from occurring. That is by unifying the West in the way that I've been describing this afternoon.
Order. I thank the Prime Minister for his statement. I'm sorry not everybody could get in, but we do have to move on to the next business. Order, Alistair Carmichael.